One of the biggest things that we have to be able to understand within ourselves is our own bias. In today's workshop on Recover Yourself, we are going to be facing bias. We're going to be trying to understand why we have bias. We're not going to be doing that directly, however. We are going to be looking at that in a way where we are recovering ourselves. The bias is just something that we have within us, and we don't have to. Thing is so many of our biases have come from outside of ourselves. And by recovering ourselves, we can shed many of those biases so that we can understand, connect, and appreciate other people, places, and things that maybe we don't always have the ability to do. So today's workshop is for professionals. It is also open to the public. Anybody that is a professional, I'm going to be releasing 3 polls to everybody that is on this workshop here on Zoom. And those polls need to be answered by you if you want to receive credit for your continuing education units. Those continuing education units, or CEUs, are going to be distributed to you upon completion of this workshop. Anybody that is joining us live on YouTube, please understand that the first hour of this workshop you will have access to. Beyond that, when we start going into exercises and talking about things personally, you won't be able to continue watching. If you are interested, if this workshop is something that you want to continue to explore, I suggest you come to my next workshop. I have one next Tuesday, as well as the following Tuesday. So if you're interested in doing the full workshop, which is 2 to 3 hours, depending on how much sharing and other things go on. But this first section is just a primer on what recovering yourself is all about. For those of you that are here, maybe some of your clients or some of your coworkers have been through this. So I want to let you know, though, if you do have something to expect, if you do expect something, I want you to try and be as open a book as possible. When we have something to expect, if we expect anything, that is a bias that holds us in a position of being like, I'm expecting to get this. Whatever you're expecting to get may shift throughout this workshop, may not be what you're looking for. So I want you to be here present with me now. And if there is something you expect, we'll address that after we go through the first hour of this workshop. And then I'll make sure that we can, adjust to making sure that you can have that experience within this workshop. So because some of you that are here on the Zoom call may be connected to one another, sharing might be a little difficult. I want everybody to at least agree that whatever happens here stays here, and that we do create a sense of freedom and openness to share. Sharing is one of the greatest ways that we can open ourselves up to what it is we're here to share, what it is we're here to learn. Because what you are here to learn is going to be a little different, quite a bit different than what someone else is here to learn. Although we can learn those things by doing the same lessons, the actual learning, the thing that we're learning is about us. And so it's very unique, it's very personal. And it could bring up a lot of triggers and a lot of other things. We are going to talk directly about triggers today. So your triggers are yours. Anybody else and everybody else that's involved here is going to have different triggers. And those triggers are going to have to be worked out by them. And so we want to make sure that we're not judging each other. And anybody that's here that's looking to get ahead by getting some dirt on another person, I hope that you understand how, at least by the end of this workshop, how not nice that is, and how that is creating your bias and playing into your fears and other things like that. So I hope that we are clear that please do share if you feel safe. However, it is your safety. And if you do not feel safe sharing, by all means, do not. So we all face burnout and fatigue. And so much of that burnout and fatigue in our lives, especially for those of us that are professional caregivers, comes from emotional investment, right? How many of you have done something and emotionally been invested in something and someone else not do it? This happens a lot in the drug and alcohol world because it's like, hey, I'm emotionally invested in your recovery. I'm emotionally invested in the type of recovery that we do. Many types of recovery, many types of treatment centers are abstinence only. And so if we take a piss test and you fail that piss test, we can kick you out. Well, failing that piss test for somebody, or having somebody fail a piss test and you kicking them out, could yield a lot of emotional investment, right? There's a lot of emotional investment in their health. Something happens and now you're emotionally invested in their outcome, but you also have new people coming in. So it's very difficult for us to process that emotional, the emotional tolls that our jobs create. Burnout, fatigue. It's very often that we can get overly emotionally invested in a specific outcome that doesn't happen. So for this first hour, we are going to go over the foundation of what recover yourself looks like. And when you recover yourself, you're going to be able to address those emotional investments that you give, not by reducing those emotional investments, but by understanding them so that you don't overly invest. I'm not trying to say you don't invest emotionally. You'll see what I mean by all that as we go through. But as this first hour progresses, we're going to be looking at you. We're going to be looking at how you process information, how you get triggered, how your actions throughout the day contribute to your either playing a victim or being in a space of awareness avoidance, where you are avoiding being aware of what's actually happening to you and what you can do about that. When we go over this first hour of foundational stuff, it's going to be very much, oh, I see myself in that. Oh, I see others in that role. And we can decipher the two. The last 2 hours of this workshop, you are going to go on a personal journey where you are going to explore very specific things that we address within that first hour. As you explore those things, you are going to be able to get in touch with why you overly emotionally invest. When we talk about overly emotionally investing in things, you are going to be able to process that. You're going to be able to step back. You're going to be able to take that 10,000 foot view and see the landscape of everything that you're creating rather than being in it. So often we like to just be in that moment rather than being able to step back and going, what is this teaching me? And that's a hard thing to do when we are emotionally disturbed or emotionally involved or invested in a moment. When we're emotionally invested in a moment, well, taking time to just say, hey, no, this is a lesson for me, that's not possible. And we're going to talk about that today as well. So what we want to do is we want to really through that second half explore, and that's the area where you're going to be able to share the most. This is where I'm going to want to hear from you as much as I can, because that's going to be able to help you understand how this works for you personally. And anybody that doesn't share, you can see the process and how it moves forward through sharing. So that's going to be a big aspect to what we're going to be doing in that second half, that second 2/3 of this workshop. So upon completion of this, you will receive your CEUs in an email, and you will be open to a free follow-up call with me personally. So that way, if you don't feel comfortable sharing, you have the opportunity to give me a call, and we can have a half-hour conversation about what you experienced and go over some things that you wrote down and some things that came up for you. And then we can share them together. And that's, of course, private and confidential. That is not a mandatory thing. You will be getting your CEUs whether you do a follow-up call or not. I do suggest you do a follow-up call. The follow-up calls are the best way to grow into the space of recovering yourself. The follow-up calls really make it about you, right? So much of what you are going to do, you are coming to with bias already. When I say bias, I do mean a wide spectrum of bias. Like, you have a bias of what trigger means, right? There is a definition for trigger. Now, that definition does entail words. I get that. But trigger means something energetically in your body, means something emotionally, right? Like when someone were to say trigger before you knew English, before you spoke, before anything like that, it meant something. You could get and receive that information without knowing the definition of the word and still understand it. So when you hear the word trigger, something happens on multiple levels. And in those levels, you have assumptions and you have biases of what that means. And when you tell somebody, like one of your clients, oh, what triggers you? Well, that could mean one thing to one person and something else to another. And if we don't understand how we define trigger, we're not going to be able to be open or aware of how other people define that same word. So what you're receiving here today is information for your practice, for your job, for your work. You will grow in your job and be able to connect and communicate better with the people that you interact with. But the only reason that you are going to be able to connect better with those people is because you are going to be connecting better with yourself. One of the big gaps that we have in our society is that our actions are stagnant. Our actions are about people outside of us. Our actions are, how many of you have been in relationships with people who are like, I want you to do this more. And you're like, okay, I can try. But you have no real intention or desire to actually do that thing. And so the conversation is closed off because the person that's asking you to be someone that you're not is not aware that that's not who you are and that's not what you are willing to do. And maybe it's you're not willing to do it for them and you're willing to do it for someone else, but there are reasons for that. And those are the things that we're looking for today. We're looking for the reasons that our bias exists. We're looking for the reasons that we hold certain biases. And when we can touch base with those biases, when we can be aware that we have those biases, when we are aware why we treat ourselves in a certain way, it'll help us understand why we're treating someone else in another way. So, I'm trying to look and see if I can do something. Okay. So let's start with the idea that we have all, if we can just all get on the same page with, we have all given up parts of ourselves to please other people. That is a huge thing to recognize. Who you are today would be very different if you were surrounded by different people. If your parents were different parents, you would be very different. If you grew up in a house or an apartment, that's going to make you different. If you had two fathers or two mothers, or if you had a single mother or a single father, those sorts of things, those sorts of experiences have formed us. And in each of those situations, whatever the situation, whatever the experience, we have had to give up little parts of ourselves. And we do that as children, as a baby. We cry a certain way, we get food. We act a certain way, we get punished. Immediately we start to learn in our childhood, oh, if I do this, then I'm going to get this. Even if I'm not attracted to doing that, this is a reward system. And if I do A and B, well, then I get rewards C and D. Wonderful. But if I do F, well, now I'm treated poorly. So I am going to not do F, even though I am drawn to it for some reason. Now, you're all going to be, you're all running across people who are drawn to things that the world doesn't like, that we have rules against, that we have laws against. They're drawn to that for some reason. And This is not to say that it's okay to hurt other people. This is not to say that it is okay to do things that are against the law, but it is to say that we have to understand that people are being drawn to do that. And obviously, the punishment of not doing it is not stopping them for whatever reason that is. And we have to understand that they are walking into that situation knowingly to some extent. They have to recognize that that is happening. And you do too. You have to understand that you have to understand, because you're working with this population, that they are probably not happy doing what they do, no matter how much they want to pretend or act as if they do. But it might be easier for you to understand that when you find out where you're pretending. And that's what we're here to recover. That's why we talk about recovering ourselves, because when you can go out and you have taken stock in where you're pretending to go along with everybody else, you'll get to see and understand why someone else might be doing that. So we're going to start with awareness avoidance. Awareness avoidance is a very, very tricky little thing that we have to engage with regularly. Because we all want to check out and distract ourselves a little bit from things that we engage that are happening around us. Right? We want to avoid being aware of what we're doing. Sometimes we just don't like what we're doing, especially if we're just doing it for someone else. The problem with wanting to practice awareness avoidance is that we inadvertently ask something outside of ourselves to fill our lives with the exact thing that awareness can bring. Now, awareness isn't going to bring it alone, but we're going to go through why and what we need to do in order to touch that a little later today in this talk. So first off, we want to look at some of these big ideas, right? Trust issues, security issues, staying calm, feeling abundant, feeling confident, feeling safe. All of these things, if we look at our lives and we look at where we get triggered, where we start wanting to check out, we can often find one of these big topics at the core of it, right? Like if I don't have trust for the system, or if I don't trust other people, or if I don't trust myself, every time trust comes up, I could move into a different brain state where actually I'm not aware of my actions. I'm triggered, so I'm starting to now work on just action, right? These are times when we might get physical with people. These are times when we might get loud with people. These are times when and then we can feel bad about that afterwards. And sometimes when we feel bad about that, we continue to feel scared of the topic and then say, well, these are the reasons why we were right to be that way, right? This is what happens in court a lot. And this is avoiding being aware of things that we don't want to look at, right? I mean, we can see in case after case after case, whether you're a policeman or a lawyer, or like, if you've done something that is wrong and that came out of a reaction, we can lay the claim that that reaction was justified. Whether it was right or wrong, it was justified. And justified is saying, well, because A happened, B happened, and B is a reaction to A. But we don't get to the reaction if we're aware. And that's the whole point of recovering yourself. As an individual, if you avoid being aware of what's triggering you, if you avoid being aware of all the little things that are leading up to something bigger, well, then you're not being honest with yourself, and you're starting to shift into an area that is dangerous, because it could just grow, right? Like your fears are going to grow into whatever action it's going to take. So we all want to distract ourselves. Awareness avoidance is at the core of what we're going to be talking about today. So like this idea of being of avoiding being aware of what's going on with yourself and questioning yourself and getting into that place of like, well, what am I doing and why? Is why do we do this? Why do we want to practice awareness avoidance? Because when we feel a lack in any of the areas our body feels uncomfortable, and distracting ourselves from that is soothing. Like we feel justified. But the thing is your actions, that which you want to do, are done because you're being drawn to do them. But when you overly process that, when you come up with justifications for why you're doing it, what you're doing is you're letting yourself off the hook from that awareness of yourself. You're actually avoiding who you are. I'm not like, yes, there are murderers out there, and they should be who they are, but they're probably murderers because they're not aware of who they are. Right? There's a lot going on in there, and we have to make sure that we are continuing to add awareness to our life. And awareness will keep itself in check. It's not like, oh, I am overly aware and that's now a disease, right? No, I'm curious. So awareness avoidance is really curiosity about who you are and why things make you scared, why things make you feel uncomfortable, and why you want to be where you are at the moment. So a large aspect of, once again, I'm MartinJon, and I'm coming out of 20 years of sobriety. So I have 20 years of abstinence from drugs and alcohol. I'm 46. I got a nice complexion, so I'm a lucky man. But what I talk about is the difference between recovering from and recovering to. Right? I want people to recover to who they are, so that society can recover to what it is. Right? Society has to recover from a whole lot today. You guys know that. I know that. Recovering from is the biggest aspect of recovery, biggest, because if you're not recovering from, you're not thinking clearly, right? You are thinking under the influence of something. So to recover from, the most important, hands down thing that you have to do if you want to move into a space of recovery, you have to separate yourself from that which you are living under the influence of. Many of you may be living under the influence of your position. Many of you may be living under the influence of your parents. Some of you may be living under the influence of your bosses, your partners, your neighborhood. It may be forcing you to move to do things. Living under the influence of your neighbors may force you to buy a car that's more expensive than you can afford, and then causes stress, which causes like anxiety in your relationship, which causes you to break up and like all sorts of things. But living under the influence of other things is what we want to really sort of look at when we're talking about awareness avoidance. Because when you are living under the influence of something else, you don't want to recognize that. We don't want to recognize, oh, you know what, this isn't my idea, but I'm doing it anyway, right? I mean, I know there are police officers here. How many of you are living under the influence of tradition of your family to be police officers, right? And not really who you want to be or who you wanted to be. Now, that's a hard thing to look at, especially if you've been on the force for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. That is not an easy thing to look at. So being curious about the fact, whoa, am I living under the influence of this? And am I bringing anger about that to my job? Am I bringing something to that? Is this affecting how I do my job? Because I didn't want to do this, but I was under the influence of so many things. I'm going to tell you, there are people that I've worked with, clients and individuals, who have been living under the influence of their parents for their entire lives. Their parents are long gone, and still they do what they would make their parents happy, because they have yet to recover themselves in any way. They are still needing to recover from all of the abuse and all of the things that they put themselves under. Nobody's a victim here, right? We're not victims. We choose this position that we're in. I know many of you, seeing people in jail and stuff, want to be like, hey, you put yourself there. It's a great way to do it. But we put ourselves in our own prisons in our lives, right? We may have made choices in which we are now doing what was expected of us. So focusing on what we're recovering from, however, we associate our recovery with the things that are behind us, right? So let's say you are living under the influence of your parents, and you want to recover from living under the influence of your parents. Your first move might be to just make choices that your parents don't want you to make, right? Didn't want you to make. You may wholesale changes across the board everywhere, because you're like, I'm going to not live under the influence of my parents. So I am going to walk around the house naked, and I am going to quit my job, and I am going to buy a van and live by the river. And I'm going to do all of these things that my parents would hate for me to do, just because my parents would hate for me to do them. Well, that's silly, right? Because what happens then is our pendulum swings, and that's what people do in recovery. Right? And that's what people do so often in recovery. They say, okay, these are the things that got me addicted and using, and so now sobriety is the answer, and I'm recovering from this, let's say, heroin addiction. All right, so I had a heroin addiction, and these are the things I did. Now I'm giving up heroin, so I'm going to take this abstinence approach, and I'm going to not do heroin. And my entire life is really revolved around not doing heroin. It's not revolved around me. It's still revolved around heroin. I'm still living under the influence of heroin, although it is on the other side of the coin. I still haven't done anything with me. It's these externals, right? This is why awareness is so important. When I can be aware of me in this equation, then I'm adding awareness to everything. Then I'm starting to step into who I am. So long-term recovery, any sort of long-term recovery, whether, and you are on a long-term recovery path, that's going to be a big deal, right? Like, as you are on your path to recovering yourself, and it doesn't mean you have to have had a traditional addiction, or something that is life-threatening. Again, you might have a very nice life living under the influence of culture, your parents and grandparents and whatever. You may have a very nice life doing that. But there also may be something missing in it, and that thing that might be missing is you. And so we want to recover that which is us, so that we can use it in our life to continue growing. So when I talk about long-term recovery, I'm talking about your life. Like, long-term recovery just means your life. That's it. It's not about like, oh, this thing. It's not about defining it or putting it in a box. It's like, no, your life is a life of recovering who you are. You knew who you were before you came. You were born and forgot it all. Now let's recover it. Right? Let's recover all that you are. Let's recover that connection to, if you're religious, God. If you're spiritual, the universe. If you are agnostic, let's find your power. Let's find you in all of this, because if it means nothing, if life means nothing, might as well have a good time. And the best time you can have is one in which you are dictating and you are responding in a way that you would best respond, and who you want to respond. The person that you want to be responds as the person you want to be. So getting out from under the influence of all of this is going to be a big plus for all of you. There's no way that that recovering to is not on your path. Recovering to is our path, no matter who you are. because recovering to who we are, recovering ourselves is at the core of living, because we are living our lives. So to recover yourself is work that we do to strengthen and expand our lives. Very simply put, recovering ourselves launches lives that are self-guided and ceasing the incessant look for answers outside of ourselves. How many of you have, lawyers, any lawyers out there know that people ask you probably way more questions than they need to. And you may be very happy about that because you charge them by, every 5-minute block or whatever, and that's fine. But if they could just make their own choices, then they wouldn't make all the mistakes between the time they called you and the time you got to call them back, right? They call you, should I do this? They've already done it. You call them back and you're like, fuck, now I got to deal with this, right? So same thing with you guys in your body, in your heart, in your mind, know the right answer. And yet, because you are living under the influence of someone or something else, you have to continue asking that thing if you're right, because that is influencing who you are. And we want to stop that. And as we go through today, we're going to continue to pick apart and look at all of the little places where we might be able to shed some more and more of those things. So, in order to recover the self, and I'm going to let you know, you guys are like both men and women that are here, men, women, trans folks, anybody that is here. Everybody here has the benefit of the last 50 years of expanding understanding, of the expansive understanding of who you are as a person, not as a gender, but as a person. We have opened the floodgates to understanding us, our unique selves. Although I associate very masculine, I have a very good connection with my feminine sort of person. And I identify very masculine. I carry a crystal with me, usually. And I meditate and I am kind. All of these things when I was born were very, very different. If I, as a person, as I associate today, was my age in 1975 when I was born, I would have had to have had long hair, wavy clothes, and had a guru because of how divergent I am from the masculine idea that existed in 1975. Today, there is a deep desire to connect with oneself on a deeper level than ever. It's deeper than it's ever been, our desire to connect with oneself. Memes and pop culture are ever expanding ideas of this. Like there is kindness out there. There are things that meeting someone today does not immediately start with, I'm going to cut you down just a little bit to see who you are and what you do. That doesn't exist today. And if it does, it's going away. And many of you who still do that may already start to see in your life, oh, that was a shitty thing to say. That was a shitty thing to do. I made fun of somebody that I didn't know. And it actually didn't make me feel any better, and it made them feel awkward. So, in the back of your mind, that's the same thing. That is the same thing an alcoholic has when they say, maybe I'm drinking too much. And then they put it out of their mind because they want to avoid being aware of that question. They want to avoid being aware of actually looking at me. Because if I have to look at myself, well, then who knows what's on the other side of that? I have no idea. And if I don't know what's on the other side of that, I better keep that door closed. That desire forces us, that desire to want to connect with ourselves, like deeper in us, right? Like it's not like just the fact that that question comes up means that there's a desire to do it. So, and that desire forces the idea that we need to recover to something. That we need to add this conversation of what are we recovering to the recovery conversation. Because when we speak of recovering from, we are just talking about living without, right? That is that initial thought. I need to recover from that thought of, oh, this, I made fun of somebody and that's what I want to be doing. I poked fun, or I, at the expense of somebody else, I am comfortable. But while we speak of recovering from, we define ourselves as living without that. When we say, oh, I got to recover from doing that, right? Like I got to not do that so I can, but that's not the end of the line, right? Like while speaking of recovering to, what we immediately start to say, okay, well, now I don't feel comfortable about thinking that, saying that, being that. So now I can, okay, well, I don't feel comfortable. Again, put that on a shelf. I want to recover from this idea that I wanted before. And let's pick up what does make me feel comfortable. And yes, someone else might make me feel uncomfortable. Like their response might make me feel uncomfortable. We're going to talk about why our response of being uncomfortable isn't actually coming from a state of victimhood. We are not a victim of the way that they responded. We're a victim of our assumptions. We're a victim of the things that we've been avoiding looking at. And if we just sit here and say, I'm a victim of you being weak because, like cancel culture, they canceled me, like, you're mad, not because they canceled you. You're mad because no one listened to you in the first place. And when they did, it was never going to be enough. Maybe, I don't know. Everybody's different. But either way, that's how it rolls out. It's not that you're a victim. It's that you have an attachment to an idea that you've been avoiding about yourself. And we're going to get into that today. So recovering to immediately begins to define our life as living within a cycle, within the whole of everything. We are not a victim. We are not out here trying to, if we get angry, if we don't like something, well, all of those things are about us. It's not about that thing out there, because that thing out there is neutral. You guys. Give me a moment. I had a light fall. My bad. Okay. So recover from, recover to, consumer culture. Consumer culture attacks our discomfort. We attack discomfort. We want people to feel comfortable. And as long as they're going about feeling comfortable in a way that we're comfortable with, you keep doing it, i.e. spending money, like avoiding your family, as long as you are a good citizen in the way that we describe as a good citizen, yeah, you're good. But the minute you want to be comfortable by using heroin, the minute you want to be comfortable by, setting off your anger and hurting other people, well, we got to put the clamp down on it, and that's okay. I want to play a 30-second video of this Ruby Warrington. She wrote the book Sober Curious, and this is talking about what it means to be in a space of clarity, because that's what we really need. We need to think clearly.
It's not so much that I'm pro abstinence, I'm pro clarity. Whatever it takes to have real, true clarity of thought and mind and intention, that's what I am pro, because I think there are so many things in our world today that are set up and designed to steal our attention and to shape our opinions and to shape who we think we are. And we have to be super vigilant in this society that we live in now to retain clarity. And I think that any substance, any behavior that kind of clouds our connection to ourselves ultimately gets in the way of clarity.
So that is a great way of understanding what we're going to be talking about today and what we are talking about today. Right? Like clarity. We want you to be clear out there when you're working with the public. We want you and we want them to be clear. And if you can be clear about who you are, where your triggers are, deal with those triggers, associate yourself, no longer associate yourself with those triggers, then you are going to be able to treat public much better, because you begin to treat yourself much better. And that's huge. It's a big, big deal to get into a place where you can clearly understand your triggers and your reactions to those triggers.
It's not so much that I'm pro.
Okay. So these are huge. I want you guys to understand that when I say addiction, I utilize the term in a really broad spectrum, right? An addiction is just something that you continue doing, and they say with negative consequences, but as soon as you say like negative consequences, well, those negative consequences might not have come up yet, but it still might be an addiction. Right? You might not have negative consequences, but it's still an addiction, right? Let's say you're a cigarette smoker. You might not have negative consequences for 30, 40, 60 years. I mean, no negative consequences that you can tell. You might even be a runner. And your addiction is still an addiction. It doesn't mean just because there are no obvious negative outcomes, negative things happening right now in front of you, it doesn't mean that smoking, you're not going to lose your job for smoking. You're not going to, you might not get in a car accident because you're smoking. Like all of these things about smoking, but smoking's addictive, right? So I like to utilize the term pacifier. For one reason is because a pacifier, that's what they are. Addictions are pacifiers. They're things that we do to pacify ourselves from the things that are coming up in our lives. And that's a big deal, because we are taking ourselves out of the equation. We are moving to a place where we can not pay attention. So drugs and alcohol top this list, right? I'm willing to bet most of you, after a hard day of work, have at some point or continue to go home and say, I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to have a cocktail. Had a long day, right? I had a long day. I'm going to have a cocktail. Great. I have no problem with this. This is wonderful. As long as when you're done with that cocktail, you ask yourself, why is it that when I have a hard day, I need to have a cocktail? Or why is it that I have decided to do something with my life in which every day is a hard day? If we don't ask those questions, well, then the cocktail isn't doing us any good. It just becomes a pacifier. It just becomes something that we go to because, sucking on a nook isn't what adults do anymore, right? I want to calm myself down. I want to pacify myself in some way that I can do this. And the question does have to come up, well, why did I choose this path? Why am I on this path? Why do I want to be here? Those are big questions that we have to ask ourselves. And if we're not asking ourselves that question, then the cocktail's not doing us any good. right? It's not like, okay, I need a cocktail because I had a bad day. Now that I am clear-headed, now that I'm clear-headed, I can process this. Like that would be the trajectory of a logical person, of a person of our intellect, of our intellectual capacity, right? Like it would be like, hey, I had a bad day. Now I'm going to have a drink so I can like relieve myself of that bad day. And then I am going to process why that day was bad so that I don't have another. That's not what we do. We say, you know what? I had a bad day. I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to watch some Netflix. Then I'm going to go back to work. And then I'm going to go. Well, if you're not doing anything to alter the reason you need a pacifier, then you are practicing awareness avoidance. Surprise, surprise. We came back. So television, once again, I am going to have a cocktail and then I'm going to watch a show, right? And I'm not saying that each and every one of you does this. Many of you may have switched that up. So I had a long day. I'm going to go to a meeting, right? And we want to stay in that space of recovering from, right? I'm going to go to a meeting. If you guys like myself was in a, had a relationship with a 12-step program, maybe you're going to go to a meeting, and maybe that's great. Maybe that's great. But if you don't leave that meeting and ask yourself, hey, why did I need that? What about that am I not giving myself? Or what about that can I incorporate into my life? And maybe the meeting is fine. Maybe the meeting is a pacifier, right? So we have to be able to process that. We have to process, even if it's a good thing, even if we assume it has good connotations because it got us to where we are, we do have to ask the question, well, is it? Social media is huge. Many of you probably have social media. Many of you probably are on social media and are interested in what that does. And so you can get on your phone and you can doom scroll with the endless scrolling. These are all pacifiers, emotional loops. This may be more common with the police among you, only because you are constantly interacting with others. And so your emotions can be triggered and slowly rise throughout the day as you continue a rise of emotional loops. Judges, lawyers, you may have the freedom to step away for 5 minutes and do a quietness thing. But you can structure your day better, right? Like you can structure your day where you know what's coming up next, for the most part. Shopping or gaming. I am absolutely sure there are a number of you that would love or have or recently or still do or are just coming off of, some 20-hour batch of online gaming. Right? Like I'm 47, so I'm 46, so I don't do that so much, but I'm sure some of you that are in your 20s, like get online, play huge games. I don't know what they're called, but you guys play games and it helps you process. It helps you disconnect. You can drink Mountain Dew and pizza and drink Mountain Dew, eat pizza and enjoy your time, right? Like, and that is time well spent for you. I get that. And you're done playing that game, recognizing that you just pacified yourself, you just sucked on a nook for 20 hours is a really important part of the process. If you do not recognize that you are if you are not recognizing that you are sucking on a nook for 20 hours, then you're avoiding being aware of what's going on in your life. And if your job that you work, let's say 40 to 60 hours a week, causes you to play 20 hours of online gaming, well, there's an equation there that needs to be worked out. And it might not come out that what you feel like you want to be doing is actually what you want to be doing. And it may be because you are living under the influence of other people, places, or things. Work. I'm sure there are lawyers here that under the guise of it's cheaper to keep, or are in relationships that they're like, I'm just going to work 50, 60, 80 hours. I'm just going to work 80 hours a week so I don't have to be in this relationship that I'm in because it's cheaper to keep her, right? Like, whether you're male or female, it doesn't matter. I'm sure that work is a pacifier for you to deal with something that you don't or aren't quite ready to look at. Eating. This is for everybody. It is something that women tend to lean towards. It is something that culture has said women tend to lean towards, but men do it just as much. They just distribute body weight, and it's okay for men to be overweight more than women. And so they eat just as much to satisfy their needs for comforting as well. Now, this is one, I always like to save this one a little bit and just spend a little time on caffeine. How many of you chose to drink coffee today? Most of you probably chose to drink coffee today. So how many of you, restating that question, how many of you actually chose, like made the choice to drink coffee today, or just executed a decision you made some time ago? Most of you will find, if you look at that question honestly, that you executed a decision. Maybe a small percentage of you actually woke up not knowing if you were going to have coffee, and someone said, hey, do you want coffee? And you said, you know what? Yeah, I'll have a cup of coffee. That is what choosing to have a cup of coffee looks like. It's like, you know what? Yes, I will have a cup of coffee today. Most people go to bed, put coffee in their coffee maker and have it start so they can smell the coffee in the morning, or their coffee is prepared, or they know that at 7:00 they're going to be at the Starbucks like drive-up window and they're going to have their coffee. They know before they go to bed exactly what they're going to be doing tomorrow in terms of their coffee intake. And if you do, the problem is you're not making the choice in the moment. And there's a possibility you're not a coffee drinker today, but you're not aware of that because you've already made the decision. You make a decision to do tomorrow something that you may not want to be doing tomorrow. And that's huge in our lives, because how many choices did we make yesterday that we executed today that may not even be in line with who we are today? It's so important to understand and be in touch with who we are right now. And I'm not saying you got to do that for every little thing in your life, but if you know every Saturday you do ABC, well, how about you not do that one Saturday and see what comes up? How about you not have coffee? You're like, oh, but I'm going to get a headache, and I'm going to get this, and I'm going to get that, I'm going to get that. I'm like, well, now you're predicting what's going to happen in the future, and odds are you're going to experience all of those things, and you'll go back to having your coffee, because you know what? It is uncomfortable to become aware of who we are at any given moment. And that's not fun. Clutter and cleaning. We all know somebody that cleans when they get nervous. Like, oh, I'm nervous, I'm going to clean the house. I'm going to hose down the front porch. Like, what are you doing? This makes no sense. It doesn't matter. That helps them pacify. When we're done pacifying, when we put that down, when we can stop pacifying for a minute, we can ask ourselves, well, why do I want to do that? What is it that makes me want to step into this pacifying? What do I want to gain out of it? Is it going to give me perspective? Is it going to give me space to not put myself in a position of doing this. Too many people want to look at the pacifier and say, hey, stop doing the pacifier. Well, there's a thing that caused me to do the pacifier that I'm not looking at. Right? It's like, I work a job that's too stressful. Okay, I come home and have a drink. If I don't question the reason that I wanted to drink in the first place, well, I am going to continue drinking. And then at some point, I'm going to be asked to stop drinking because I'm doing it too much. Well, at this point, I lost the job that I was pacifying against, and now I have this bigger problem. But the problem of me working too much was about me not feeling valued, me not feeling like I had value in the world. Well, now that's even further down the line. This is why we need to recover ourselves. This is why we need to ask ourselves throughout your life now, today, when you get triggered and when you turn to one of your pacifiers, you want to ask yourself, what caused that? Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you want to be you. Why does that thought come in my head? Why did I need that? That's what I want you to be able to do. I want you to break down that awareness avoidance wall and say, why did I yell at my wife? I love my wife. Or maybe I don't. And if I don't, I got to say something. And it's not going to be easy. But you know what's harder? Hiding that. So, where are you not showing up? Where are you not being present? Where are you not being yourself? Where are you choosing to respond in a way that under slightly different circumstances, you would choose differently, right? You are responding, like you can respond with understanding, or you can respond with force. Those are two ways, and there are a myriad of ways of responding to anything, but those are two ways of responding. Now, if I were to say, okay, well, you faced a tall, attractive woman wearing a business suit, how are you going to respond? With force or with understanding? All right. You interact with somebody that you interact with a woman the same age as the other woman, wearing a shop till you drop t-shirt that has stains on it and stretch pants and is overweight. How are you going to respond? With sports, with force, or with forceful even speaking, or with understanding? Right? Like, under slightly different circumstances, we are going to respond very differently. And the circumstances can change with what we're faced with. And those are our biases. Those are the things that we face day in and day out and have no idea why. And the thing is like, force and understanding are relative. Every day we do have to step away from one thing or another. And although that's normal, we need to take note as to why we're stepping away or why we're choosing something that may be under slightly different circumstances. We would choose something differently. And actually that idea, this idea that, like, I would personally endorse this theory, right? I personally endorse the theory that a tree is alive. Under a time restraint, under pressure, I may choose that a tree is not alive. Right? If I'm taking a test, is this alive? Is this alive? Is this alive? Is this alive? Whatever. I may select, oh, that plant is not alive, just because it doesn't move, it doesn't have the things. But if I didn't have a time restraint and I had time to think about it, I would say, oh, yes, of course it's alive. I know it's alive. And that's the same thing. Like, and the police officers out there, the judges out there, I mean, judges have a lot more time. They're not always under such a time restraint. Lawyers, you deal with, like, the judges have time. They can create time so that they can process information. And that's great, unless they're reactionary. If they're reactionary, that's not such a good idea. Lawyers have some time, but may have to respond and react under some time restraint, which could cause you to not respond in a way that you would like. Many of you may have responded in court in a way that you were like, oh, why did I say that? You know, it was probably because of a time restraint, because under different circumstances, if you had time to respond, if you had time to process, you would have responded differently. Police officers, you have no time. No time to respond. And time restraint, when you are put under a time restraint to respond, you actually revert to your most, let's call it mammalian responses, and your deepest, most understanding of something. That means that logic is a thing that's a privilege. We have privilege to work with logic. Police officers, because of the time restraint, because they are often encouraged to act quickly, don't get the benefit of being able to act logically all the time. And so any police officers that are here working on that now, like when you are not triggered and you are not working on that in other aspects of your life, it's going to be huge for you. Working on understanding what is it you personally endorse. Because when you go out there on the job and you get triggered, you are not going to have the benefit of being able to think logically. You have to do that after your evening cocktail. And if you don't, that evening cocktail is just sending you back out into the world the next day to make the same mistakes you made yesterday without ever checking it out. Awareness is noticing where we check out or where we choose not to engage. Noticing where we check out or where we're choosing not to engage helps us recover ourselves. If you don't question yourself, if you don't say, where would I like to have done better today? You are not moving in a direction that you are able to actually recover yourself. So there is a gap between our conscious mind and how we respond to things subconsciously. And subconsciously, such a strong coaxing to respond. And when we are triggered, and when we reach in our pacifiers, and when we reach for our pacifiers, when we are triggered, our subconscious will take over, especially if we have a time restraint on responding. If there is a time restraint on responding and we are responding while we're triggered and hoping for a pacifier, that pacifier becomes our power in the situation. I have overseen, and I want you guys to understand, when you're out there, you are working. The people you are interacting with, they're living. There's a huge difference there. Huge. There is, like, you are the one that we are going to look to have the higher moral compass. You are the one that we are looking to make the right choice. And the world is becoming increasingly difficult for you under those circumstances because you don't even have the proper training like this to assess the trauma that you've experienced. So in order to close that gap between the conscious and subconscious mind, we have to become aware of how what is happening to us points back to us. We're processing the world through our eyes in our minds. It's not separate. The world is not separate from us. We are in it. We are part of it. And our jobs, just because it's our jobs, doesn't mean we can compartmentalize that. If we have an argument with our spouse, well, we're going to work and we're already triggered. Now, yeah, we can put that behind us, right? No, that's not even possible. Right? You can't compartmentalize your life in that way. It's not like, and if you guys want to believe that you can, that's great. I would get a second opinion on that. Yeah, I bet many of you have been sitting with your partners or sitting with other people on the force and been like, wow, he's angry today. You're able to see that. I am willing to bet if you guys can just take that next step of asking yourself and getting curious as to why, you are going to find strength and within you and within your job that will keep you from burning out, keep you from getting to a place where you are responding in ways that you don't want to respond. Keeping you responding to things in ways that will make sure that you need to defend yourself. If you can go home at the end of the day without having to defend anything you've done, and you can say, I am at peace with all of my choices today. That's what I want. Many of you, maybe even in defending it, like utilize pride instead of defense. You're like, yeah, I did this today, but there's shame in there. There's things in there that are muddying it up. Those things are going to come up more and more and more all the time because we as human beings are growing beyond this old 1950s way of thinking about the world. We're here together and we have to make that work. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you that aren't in the psychological aspects of things, I want you guys to understand, if you do not have at least a love and belonging place, which is, I'm sure, all of you having jobs and having community, you are all within love and belonging, maybe even kind of reaching into safety. You may feel like you're contributing, but some of you may not be contributing as much as you think. You may want to feel like you're contributing, but really what's happening is you're receiving a lot of praise for what you do. And so you are in an addictive loop with your job. But I digress. In terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to become secure within love and belonging before it can be said we are thinking clearly. If you are not in a space of love and belonging, if you're not secure in that, you can't think clearly. If you don't have water, you're not going to be thinking clearly. You're going to be living under the influence of needing water. You're going to be living under the influence of that which you need in order to think clearly. If you are hungry, you are living under the influence of that hunger. If you are sad, if you received a diagnosis, you will be living under the influence of that. Living under the influence of those things is a recipe for disaster. So once you can get to a place of love and belonging, you can start processing what is it you're living under the influence of external to your immediate needs, and then you can grow from there. Before that, we are heavily influenced by external forces. So this is where it all ends. And I want you guys to understand that this is the first hour of a longer workshop that I encourage each and every one of you to join me on, especially if you are a drug and alcohol counselor. This is the work that, or if you work in drug and alcohol enforcement in any way, I encourage each and every one of you to come and work with me because it is such a big deal to be in touch with who you are. And I want you to do that. What are the choices you are making or not making in your life, i.e. your coffee choice? Is that a choice or is it an execution of something? When do you hide? When are you trying to hide behind defense? When are you trying to hide behind pride? When are you trying to hide behind anything? If you're black bagging it, over at the adult store, are you afraid of being seen? Maybe, and that's perfectly normal. But if you're afraid to be seen, then you're probably not happy about your decisions. I mean, it's okay that it's okay you're black bagging it. But if you're afraid of being seen as a black bagger, right? Like, then what's the Why are you doing it? Why are you afraid? What does that mean to you? Who or what gets us angry? Why? Like sometimes those people, those things can lead us to understand ourselves. And remember, anything that we don't like in our lives, something we don't like about ourselves. How do we react when we get taken out of our structured day, when things kind of shift? What is that? What is the story that we're saying? Why are we getting taken out? Those things can lead us back to ourselves. We have to just continue to be aware. Why? What is this? Doesn't matter. Like if you're going to respond in a way that is reactionary, that's fine. You've already done it for however long you've been alive. It's not like you're going to be making anybody mad now. But tomorrow, after you've processed that, you are going to be making better decisions that are more in line with who you are. And you are going to take one more step towards recovering who you are completely. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to end here. For anybody that is on the call physically, personally, you will continue with the workshop.